Living my bucolic life, we have 3 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Moving on, we are going to pockets. So for each pocket, there's a piece, and there's actually 2 in this pattern. I'm just using 1. I'm using the upper pocket piece, and you'll be cutting fabric and lining. I haven't trimmed my lining yet. For the lining, they're going to have you just use your pocket piece, but only cut that far down, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do, I do have my pieces cut to the right dimensions here. And I'm going to mark these 2 little dots, which are indicating my fold line. And then draw a line. I made sure when I was cutting out my pockets that they are 100% on grain. So my fold line, my edges, everything is perfectly square. Okay, so here's the thing. They will say, go ahead and thread line this fold line, the seam lines down the edge and everything like that. The seam line threading we're going to be getting rid of in just a moment, because as soon as we're done placing our trim, we're going to actually be folding it on that seam line and pressing it. So you know what I'm going to do? I am going to draw these lines on the right side with my heat erasable pen. That way I have them to see while I'm working. And as soon as I am done placing my trim and I go to fold it and press it, these marks will disappear, and I think it's going to work just as well. So there you go. That's a lot faster to me than thread marking it. I don't mind thread marking where there's a purpose for it. I do mind thread marking when it just seems like we're making busy work. So like you saw on the front piece, there was a whole lot of stuff going on, so I have no problem thread marking that. But for a little pocket, yeah, no, I don't see that point. Okay, so my pocket pieces are marked. So now what I need to decide at this point is how far down from the edge I want my trim to be placed. So if this is my fold line, whatever I decide here is going to carry over also to the cuffs and to the front of the jacket. So if I put it here, that puts the top of the edge about 1/4 inch down. I could move it all the way up to the edge. I could bring it way down here. You know, I have that option. I kind of like it at about 1/4 inch away. You know, I like the look of that. So that's what I'm going to go with. So I am going to be stitching this on by hand, but instead of thread basting it on and then hand stitching it, I'm going to stitch witchery it on and then hand sew it. All right, so I decided that if I take my fold line and I draw another line down 5/8 of an inch, and I center my trim on that 5/8 line, that's going to give me the placement. And it's actually 3 rows down instead of 2 once I got to playing with it. I think I like that better. So right now it's on with stitch witchery. What I just did, because I just have one spool of thread that really matches this, and I hate to go back and forth to my sewing machine and get it, I just pull a whole bunch of it off my bobbin, pull it over my wax all at once, and then roll it up. This had ribbon on it, but you know, it's handy. And then I wrap it around my massive spool here, and I can just set that aside so I have a whole bunch of waxed matched thread, you know, ready to go, because I have a feeling I'm going to be using it. And so what I'm going to do now is thread my needle eventually. Hang on, let me cut this at an angle here, make it easier. I'm going to be hand stitching my trim on. I'm just leaving this little part dangling at the sides for right now. And then once I get this pocket trim sewed along just on the GIMP way, I'll see if it looks like it's going to need another stitch somewhere else. This is actually a very good practice run for sewing on the trim because it's such a small piece. Once I figure out the best way to do it here on the pocket, then I can carry that over and do the same thing on the main part of the jacket in the same way. Alright, so I have stitched on by hand, and again you cannot see my threads because they match so well. But I stitched it on and I feel very comfortable. I think it's going to stay. Oopsie. Okay. See that? When I wiggle, 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 wiggle like that, I got a couple threads that came loose. So that's a good test for me because I know it will be under friction. So with those, I can either just cut them off, pull them off, or stitch them in. I think what I'm doing is I'm loosely pulling them, and yeah, I think I'm just going to tuck it in. This little part just fell off, so that's a goner. I'm just going to thread my fast threading needle, here you are, with these threads and tuck it in. Come on. May have to bend it down a bit. Tuck those in, and I'll just secure them on the underside. If they're too short to thread and turn in, I can stick my needle in halfway first. And because it's a self-threading needle, all I have to do is push these little threads through it. That's the one problem with trimming GIMP or something like that, is it does have a tendency to have a little bit of a freedom issue there. But, so here it is, it's on this side. While it's here and no one's ever going to see it, I'm just going to quickly, invisibly glue them down. Once that's dry, I'll trim off the little edges out there and call it good. All right, put this needle back. So what I also did is on my sewing machine, I came over here and I stitched the ends. So they're nice and secure and they're not going to unravel from this point down. So with that, I can go ahead and trim off the edges here. And get those out of the way. What the instructions want us to do is fold it in at the stitching line. Now this is going to be very thick right here, but I think that's just the nature of things. And it seems like on the Chanel jacket, sometimes they do look very three-dimensional when the trim is concerned. And so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Just kind of clip it where that fold line is. Now when we get down to these corners, we're going to have to miter the corners the same way that we mitered the corners on the skirt. Well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stitch them in nicely on inside, and it won't be visible because I am actually going to be putting a little lining square on top of it, but I want this to hold nice and securely here, okay? So I've got a couple options. If I do it her way, the way in the last project, it is going to be a little bit bulky, all right? I actually am going to do it a little bit differently. If you see when you fold in a square, you know, it's like mitering a corner for napkins or quilting or something. What I do is I put a little mark up here where the two are going to meet, okay? Then I can open it this way. I'm going to draw my 5/8 inch seam allowance mark here. Okay, and I'm going to, these are the marks where it was meeting when I folded it together that way. So if I line up these two like so, and this point is exact and this point is exact, what I should be able to do then is draw a line from here to here, which is going to take out all of that bulk. Draw that little line like that. I'm going to go to my machine and stitch it really quickly, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I have that little triangle sewn, and I'm going to clip it at about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to clip this little triangle off too to take some bulk out of there, so that when I flip it right side out. All right, so now that I have my chopstick all as well, so I can poke this out so that I can see that fold line nicely. And now I have a perfectly mitered corner with no bulk that I'm just going to fold like that. And what they want is just to fold this down like that too, but then we're going to be putting the pocket lining on top of that. And to me, that's a lot of bulk. Okay, so this is what I did. I basically took this stitching out, pulled it out, pulled off my hand stitching, undid the braid part to about this point. And then I just kind of clipped it and manipulated it, tucked ends underneath so that the braid itself ends right there where that fold line is. And that way, I don't have all of that bulk. That is so much better. I can't even believe how much better that is. So I did use some stitch witchery just to kind of temporarily glue it together down there. But I'm going to come back in with my matching thread, needle and matching thread here, and re-stitch down all this stuff that I just ripped up at the edge and secure that nicely before I go back and tuck in the corners up here. All right, so I have it finished now where the ends are just kind of woven in. I have it hand stitched on really securely. So now when I fold my edges in and this down, it's going to be much, much better. So I have this corner mitered already, so I need to get back and finish mitering this corner. All right. So this is basically a 90-degree angle here, and I'm marking from this point where the two seam allowances cross to this point where when I folded them together they would meet. So I'm going to go stitch that and I'll be right back. So I have my pocket. These two corners are mitered in, and I'm about to go press it, but I wanted to show you above the fold line. So say my fold line is right about here. I can remark it. It's 1 inch down from the edge. From that point, I'm starting to push it in a little bit. So I probably have it in at least 1/8 of an inch on each side. And so that is once I have this pressed, when I turn this down, these sides are not going to be showing from the outside. So pressing it this way. So with that, it's pressed in, and I use my clapper to press it down on my ironing board. So much better. I redrew my fold line, which is just a line 1 inch down from the outside edge. And now I'm going to fold it down there, which seems like a lot of bulk right here. But you know what? I'm not going to worry about that. That is not a me problem right now. Yes, it is. Yes, it is a you problem. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I can't take it. I am going to draw the fold line on this side. And on the inside here, I'm going to cut these little triangles out. Like that. That should help at least. Well, that's better. Okay, that's a lot better. So I can tuck these in, and I am going to press this one more time with this top fold down, just cutting out those triangles. I know you can't feel it, but trust me, it takes a lot of the bulk out. So I'm going to press it like this and then come back and hand stitch all these sides in. I'm going to use a catch stitch for the inside, but over here I am just going to be doing my best just to anchor all of this stuff in so it's not going to go anywhere. My thread's very camouflage-ish, so it shouldn't show up too much. On the outside edge here, where I want to keep this, you know, under control, I'm kind of doing a felling stitch type of thing. Really, it's just containment stitching. Okay, so I'm just going to do a regular catch stitch, not a herringbone, where you basically come down here, catch a thread, come up here, catch some threads, go back down here, you know, so your needle is pointed in the same direction that you're traveling, and it goes fairly fast, you can see. And what it's going to do is keep everything nice and keep this from wanting to go anywhere, at least until I get the lining in. So after I get done tightening all of this down on this pocket, I need to go and do the exact same thing with the other pocket. So I have two matching ones left. I just about forgot there is lining in these pockets. So I have completed one, and I want to show you while I work on this one. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. The first way is, you know, carefully cut everything out. And the second way is just kind of make it work as you go. And I'm going to be more or less the make it work as you go kind of plan. So what I'm going to do is take my piece of lining here, pull it so I'm on the straight, which means as I pull the two sides, I'm perfectly straight. If I was off grain and I pulled one, it would look wonky. So I can make sure I'm on straight right here. Fold it at that point, and I'm just going to pin it close to the bottom of my top fold. And basically, I am just going to work my way around and making little felling stitches as I go. So I will be stitching down this way. When I get about to this point, I will tuck this side in, pin it, work down here. When I get to this point, you know, trim off some, tuck it in, so that the final result is going to be something like this, you know, which is just little felling stitches. I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch on each side down here, and this point here, well, if you can see, this is the bottom of that fold, so it's about 1/4 inch up from the bottom of that fold. And there you go. Tiny pocket. And welcome to the second video in the making the Chanel jacket using the Vogue 8804 pattern. And in the first video, we got a lot of stuff done with preparing the front, the pocket, and all of that. So now I'm going to be moving over, and hopefully in this video, I'm going to be getting the side front shaped and all the quilting done for that side, along with the lining for the front and side front taken care of. That's the goal. So first thing I need to do is get started with marking up my side front pieces. Okay, so this is my side front piece. It's upside down. You know, this is the right side, the wrong side. We do one of each. And as you can see, my fabric is cut larger than the pattern, and I will trim it down to size once I'm done with a lot of other things. So the first thing I need to do is get started marking. Lots to mark. No one's at the door. My husband's working on a electrical thing downstairs, so there's knocking, but don't worry, we're all home. Okay, the first thing I need to do is actually punch out a couple more marks for these quilting lines. So there's 3 quilting lines on this side front piece. One here, and one here. These extra ones are for the different sizes. So this one is all sizes. I'm doing the smallest size of this set. This set is size 14 to 22, and I'm doing the 14. So I'll be doing the first one over here and the first one over here. So what I'm actually going to need to do is, because I shorten the pattern, I need to shorten where the stitching ends. And the quilting stitching should end 2 inches above the bottom so that you have room to deal with all of your hem issues. So I'm punching out the marking holes for these 3 stitching lines at that point, at the 2 inch above the cutting line point. And then I'll also punch out up here at 5/8 in from the top. Now actually this has it all stitched all the way to the top, but if I mark it here, I can continue that line. This one, I'm going to mark it at the very top, up there. All right, so I got all 3 marked. Now I'm going to do my marking similar to what I did in the first video, where it's kind of a hybrid of my way and Claire Shaeffer's way. I'm going to put a couple pins in here really quick just to hold it together. Now the front piece was interfaced. This piece and all of the other pieces I am not interfacing. I am just going as is because I'm not doing buttonholes and everything on them. So first thing is, with my pen, I am going to outline the total outline of the pattern along the cutting line. Okay, so with that done, I can see my outline here. I'm going to come back in and mark all of my circles. And again, I'm using my heat erasable pen, and I am marking right now on the wrong side. So when I'm done with all of this, all I have to do is iron it and it's going to disappear. So these 2 marks over on the side, this is marking where I'm going to be easing in to get rid of a dart that's on the stay, and we'll deal with that in a minute. This dot right here, that is for pocket placement, and since I'm changing the location of my pocket, I'm going to ignore that for right now, and I'll deal with my notches later. So I have to do exactly what I did with this piece with the other ones, but before I go over there, while I can keep an eye on my pattern here, I'm going to go ahead and draw the lines for my quilting. Now they look fairly straight. This one has a slight curve to it, that has a slight curve, but I can bend that in. Actually, you know what's the best thing to do is put another dot halfway through and then mark that one and then go at it from 2 different directions. So I'm going to do that right now. I changed to a different circle on my cutter, and it's not as sharp. I think I need to press harder. Okay, so putting this back on here, now I'm just going to add a little marking halfway through. Okay, that way I can work that curve in by going here and here. And then when I'm sewing it, I'm not going to come to a direct point, but you know, I'll just smooth that out. So the same thing here, I'm going to draw a line to these points right there and then connect it. So the top dot is for the sleeve, the bottom one is for my quilting. Okay, so now I have that curve built in, and this line is actually pretty straight here. Okay, so those are my 3 quilting lines. And these 2 that are my easing, I'm just going to make those a little bit darker because I need to see those pretty soon. So I'm going to set this piece aside and do the exact same thing to the mirror image, the other side front piece. Okay, so I've got both of these marked. I had to switch to a black pen. My red was running out. And I'm about to make one more departure. I don't see the point in thread marking the stitching line once I have trimmed this to the right side, because I know that it's a 5/8 inch seam allowance, And if I do the thread marking of my seam line, I'm just going to have to pull that out when I stitch it, and there's a chance I'll stitch over it. And there's a chance I'll have trouble pulling out, which means there's a good chance I will get frustrated. And then that starts a downward spiral. So I think I'm going to skip that step. We're just going to see how that goes. The next thing I'm going to need to mark is this piece. This is the little stay, and I have cut 2 of them out of my organza. And so this is a dart. So these outside circles are going to match up with these 2, okay? And then the inside ones, of course, are marking my dart. And since it's organza, I can just turn around and mark the other side because it all bleeds through. So pulling these off, I am going to trace out my dart lines because that's easier for me to visualize. Oops, it wants to move, this organza does. All right, so now it is time to go ahead and get started doing our best to make these things match. So what I need to do is here in this seam allowance between these 2 dots, put some gathering stitches because I'm going to be cinching those in. So I'm going to put those stitches in for both sides. So I used my matching threads here, and I know it's very difficult to see, but I have 2 rows of wider stitches here that I'm going to use to gather in between these dots. So I'm going to set this aside for a minute, and I need to sew these darts, okay? Make sure that you do 1 for each side, okay? So you might want to place them like that so you can match them up. So the way I do it is I stick a pin down 1 dot and back up the other and pinch it out here. See how spongy it is? It's kind of like horsehair, the horsehair interfacing and things like that, where it has a defined edge, where if you're making a rolled collar or something like that, it's nice to have it there because it's going to want to fly open. That's how one of these grains is on the organza. This way it's not as pronounced, but this way it really is, you know, the wonders of organza. Anyway, I'm putting a pin up here at this dot and down here where these 2 come together, putting my other pin so that I could sew on that line straight from the edge up to the point. Okay, so it's been ironed, and if these dots over here disappear, it's no biggie, I can draw them back in. So first I'm going to iron it flat just to set that seam in. Okay, and then I'm just using the edge of my seam roll to try to keep some shape in here. Now I'm going to try to press it open. Okay, so that's what it looks like, and you should have 2 different ones. All right, so back over here at the table, I have my little stay, my threads that I put in for my gathering. And what I need to do before I actually pull these is to attach my stay to the fabric. Now, Claire says use a catch stitch. Last time I did that, I didn't like the way that it worked, so I am just going to use a nice little running stitch to go around this. So, turning it this way so I can bury my knot out here in the seam allowance, I am just going to take some stitches that are invisible from the outside, you know, maybe almost 1/4 inch in, just to hold this securely here. Okay, things like that. And then just going all the way up this side, and again matching this dot over here. Looks like I erased that dot for some reason. No, it's right here. Matching up this dot over here. and placing this one goes along the grain, and do the same thing, stitch that. I'm just going to use a little light running stitch so that, you know, like I've stitched that point, but you don't see it over here, all right? All right, so this is my stay underneath here, nice and straight. Here's the top. So what I need to do is pull these gathering stitches so that my top flattens down. And my fabric is very, very thick. And I've just done this with matching threads. If I was doing anything longer than these couple inches, I would definitely have used a more heavy-duty thread, but I think that this is going to hold. So I'm going to pull it as much as I can from the one side, anchor it here, and then pull these on this side. And what I'm trying to do is get these very fat fibers of my fabric to lay flat, not to buckle, but to just lay flat and be squished closer together. Okay, so turn it this way. Once I get them so that they are the same width as the bottom, and you can see here it's pretty flat, it's up against the table there. I'm going to need to obviously press, steam, and disperse them a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and put another pin on this side just to anchor these threads onto so that they're not going to want to go anywhere. Okay, stick her down. All right, so now what I need to do is go over to my ironing board, get something round like the end of a seam roll to press this on to try to shape it to the shape that I want it to be. I just came across here, and with some little basting running stitch type things, they aren't pretty, but they're holding the outside edge of my stay just over where my gathering threads are underneath, just to secure this point, so it's going to want to do its job and keep it secure on the side. I want to show you something. This bottom edge needs to be on the straight, 100%, okay? The top one though, what I ran into is when I sewed it on before, it was not allowing this to curve the way I wanted it to. So I actually ended up pulling out my running stitch up here so that I could then mold my under part here to get the right shape that I wanted. And then I'm going to pin it and put the running stitches back in. It was just giving me grief. So if you have trouble with that, try taking off the top row. Leave the bottom in, you know, it needs to be on that straight. Take the top one off, mold it the way it needs to, and then repin it back on so that it works with your fabric, and then restitch it. All right, so with the stays in, everything curved nicely, I'm going to go ahead and trim this piece to its appropriate size. Again, I am off script by not marking the stitching line or thread marking the stitching line. Don't see that it's necessary for this piece. All right, so I have my two pieces here. Now, they don't say this in the pattern, Claire does not say it, but this is what I see. I've got princess seam pieces that I'm going to be doing a lot of manipulation with. It's not interfaced, nothing except for this is reinforced, and I just see a lot of chances for things to get stretched out of shape here. So, before I actually start sewing it together, I'm not worried about the front piece. The front piece, I interface the entire thing, plus it's organza, plus it's already quilted. It's secure. It's these pieces that aren't. So what I'm going to be doing is coming back. This is that 1-inch fusible tricot that I use quite a bit, and I'm going to be fusing it along the front edge, and I'm going to do it just matching up my edge over. It molds to it, and what that's going to do is keep these from wanting to stretch out of shape, meanwhile keeping it soft enough that when I sew it, there's going to be no ridges or anything apparent. So I'm going to do that here, and then actually I'm going to do it along here too. Okay, now along the very bottom, and along this armhole, I'm going to be using this because this is more on the straight and it's more, this will glue the fibers together so they're malleable and they're not going to get loose within themselves. This will keep it from wanting to stretch at all in addition to that. And I want to put that along the bottom and along the armhole. So I'm just going to go over and I'm going to fuse it, try to do it very carefully so I don't erase any of my markings here. If I do, I can redraw them at this point. And I am working on drawing all of these on my wrong side. I'm doing it because this is the kind of lining I'm going to be using. It's very wrinkled, but you know, it's this lining. It's a Bimberg rayon. And if I lay it down, I can see these marks underneath it, even more so with the black, which, you know, I think I'll stick with black for now on in this pattern. But that way, when I put my lining over it, I can quilt it. Okay, so this one is all secured the way that I want. And actually, after I got done, this was the one that was marked in red. I just came back, did it black, but also I needed to mark this quilting line over this organza here because I need to be able to see that. And that's another reason why I took off my stitching at the top and replaced it down again, is because I wasn't able to get this part to lie straight. It was a little wonky. So if you need to adjust it, go ahead and adjust it because this has to be nice and flat this whole way up. Now I am ready to sew my side front to my front. Feels like an eternity. So I have little notches here that I'm going to be matching up. It's kind of hard to see exactly where they are, so I'm just going to stick a pin through that point. There you go. Now before I actually sew it with the machine, I do have to baste it into place according to both Vogue and Claire, and I don't have a problem with that, so I will do that. But this is the reason why I did not choose to thread mark these pieces. And again, in the Vogue pattern, they ask you to thread mark each and every piece as far as the stitching line. But when I go to sew it together, I'm going to sew right over this, and I know where 5/8 is because it's a mark on my sewing machine. I'm familiar with how big a 5/8 inch seam allowance is, so I just don't see the point. Oh, hang on a second, let me just clip that. So just to save myself headache and everything, I'm going to pull this thread mark out of this front piece before I even baste it together because it's now or later and there's just no point to it right now. So that's my thought process. Once I have this pinned together, matching this notch in the very top, I'm going to come back and with my utilitarian basting thread, I will baste it pretty close to where the actual seam line is going to be. So on the very front, if you're just holding it nice and straight, it looks like the front piece is longer than the side front piece. But if I bend it, okay, it's going to kind of work itself out. And that's because now the outside piece has a larger surface area to go around. So what I'm going to do is basically bend it until it matches up and then pin it where it's comfortable that way, so that when I come back to baste it, it's going to be in the most natural place that it can be without puckering to stitch that, okay? Because if I tried to open it up and pin it that way, I might be trying to put extra ease where it's not the most natural place. So that's the top piece. Now here in between the two notches, and this is a princess seam, that's usually where most of the easing should be. Now here you see it's the opposite. There's more on this side than this side. So I'm going to kind of do the opposite thing, where instead of like really forcing it and everything, I'm just bending it the opposite direction. And you can see how thick my fabric is. I have fairly thick fabric here to deal with, but by doing it that way, it just seems to work out much kinder and gentler. All right, so I marked it and hand basted it, you know, and like I said, This seems to lay better if it's turned this way. This lays better if it's turned this way. So as I'm sewing it, I'm going to try to do my best to kind of guide it in those directions as best I can and see if that's going to make it sew any easier. So what I would suggest if you want to do it this way is mark your side front, because that's the side that I'm going to be looking at when I'm sewing it. And I'm just going ahead and I am marking it at 1/2 inch so that I can make sure that I keep my basting right on track, and that way. And so once I have it marked, then go ahead and start pinning it. And then once it's pinned, then go ahead and start basting it. And so just like that. I got done basting to the end, and Favorite needle died. She just snapped and she's gone. But I did find those other sisters of hers before, so there you go. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, sometimes you have a favorite needle and that's just the one you always revert back to. So anyhow, what I have to do now is, actually this one I haven't stitched yet. Let me go ahead and stitch this one, and then we're going to go over to the ironing board. Okay, so now it's time to press these seam allowances open. So I am just putting it over my seam roll, and I'm putting the wool side up just because that sometimes helps with the steaming issues of the steam coming back through. Basically it comes back into the wool and then back up through the bottom. Here's my clapper. All right, and I've got my clapper here, which is basically a piece of wood. It's unfinished, and I can just steam it. And while it's still hot and still moist, I just push down this wood on that open seam, and that's going to help make it nice and crisp. And then I can turn my whole piece this way. And by doing it on the seam roll, it's just going to help things to fall more naturally. Yeah, I'm pressing this with wild abandon, and I've got a pretty good idea that my quilting lines are disappearing. So here's the thing. That's another good reason why you could stitch on the quilting lines instead of just drawing them. There is that. I will give you that. So does it take that long to stitch on quilting lines? Not really. Do I enjoy it? Not really. What I don't enjoy is the where you stitch over it. So see how when I was pressing it, this bottom part kind of disappeared of this one and the top part of this one. These two are still fine. And this is just a personal preference. To me, it's easier just to refine that dot, draw a new line, and keep going. Then the headache of thread marking it, stitching over those threads, and having to pick things out. Because once you've really stitched over it, sometimes it's difficult to get the little fragments of that colored thread out. And, you know, that's a problem. But this is what it looks like on the outside. I think that that's a nice seam. I'm just going to top it off with one more little press from here and here. And call it good. Now, if you ever get to the point where you have something with somewhat of a nap or somewhat of a something and it's starting to shine or something, and that's driving you crazy, you can get a soft brush. I'm trying to hurry up and clean mine off. And hit it with your brush, and that's going to kind of loosen up the nap of all of those little threads that got compressed, and it'll match the rest of it. Okay, so I'm going to press the other one, go back. Because it's me and I'm ornery, I'm just going to go ahead and remark these really quick. That'll only take 2 seconds, and then we'll move on to the next part. Now, I have not actually cut my lining pieces out yet. I'm going to do that right now, but I wanted to show you they have zero body to them, you know, and I'm going to be having to handle these things and making sure they're accurate. So before I cut them out, I'm going to starch my pieces. Once they're starched and pressed, then I will put my pattern on it and cut out my pattern. And I think I'll be able to get a more accurate overall diameter, you know, everything of this piece so that I can go ahead and work with it. Okay, so I've got my pieces cut out. Now for the side front, there is a different pattern piece for lining than there is for the fashion fabric. It's the lining one, excuse me, has a dart, and it's also narrower up here in the shoulders. So because I'm able to look through my fabric to see the quilting lines, I am not transferring the quilting line markings over because I'm going to be able to see those on my fabric. If you can't, you might want to. What I am going to transfer over though are the dot placements. I'm not actually making a dart. It's just so I have an idea of where these marks are when I am fitting it. Because you don't make the dart ahead of time, you kind of like, once it's attached to the other fabric, you kind of make it fit. We'll show you. But the first thing I'm going to do is sew this front seam together just like I did for the fashion fabric. And for the lining, I went ahead and I just made some little clips where my notches are so that I can match those up easy. Okay, so I'm just laying them out like this so I can tell right off that I'm going to have two total mirror image different sides. So it really helps that they're starched. I can pick them up and handle them a lot better. So these will also be sewn at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And so I'm just matching up the tops, the bottoms, the notches, and letting the ease fall where it may as I sew the rest of it. All right, my lining is sewed and pressed open. All right, and I'm just going to set that aside for a minute because before I start attaching it here, I am going to be pulling out the rest of my thread basting or thread marking for the seam line because it's not necessary anymore, and if anything, it's just going to get in my way. Okay, now that all those marks are out, what I need to do is layer my lining piece on top here. Now, the ultimate perfect goal is that the exact seam of my lining is matching up with the exact seam of my fabric. But understand also that the lining piece is shorter here at the shoulder. That's not your problem. That's part of how the pattern is put together, so I'm not going to stress about that. And I say that's the ultimate goal because I've already done the other one just to see how it was going to work out. And when I matched this up perfectly, these two didn't match up. And you can see it's kind of the same thing here where this side is in more. So I'm going to do the best I can. These are not basted together or anything. These are just pinned. And I know that there's going to be a lot of fiddling and turning and hand stitching and all that of this, so I don't think ultimately this is going to be a problem. And this might have just been because of the alterations that I made on my particular pattern. Ooh, it's a strong magnet, but just, you know, be aware if yours is a little off. I'm not stressing at this point, so I hope you do not either. So what I need to do, back to this part, is pin it so that it's matching up with this center seams, over center seams. And it's kind of easy to see through the lining, so that's not that difficult. And then I need to come back and with diagonal basting stitches go up this seam here. So I'm just kind of starting down here in the seam allowance area and just going all the way through, and I'm making my diagonal stitches, probably at least an inch tall. Oh, almost knocked over my glass. So now that that is done, I'm just going to kind of work my way around, just smoothing out the lining piece as much as I can on this side and pinning it. Now, remember when I was first dealing with the front and I was concerned because my organza layer was just left free up here, so I put some stitch witchery to hold it in place so that it wouldn't go crazy while I was working on all this. All right, at this point, because of all of the manipulation and easing and everything for that princess seam, because of that stitch witchery, it's a little bit bubbled. So what I'm going to do is loosen that up so that it can fall where it wants to. Oh, let me just reach in here and pull it a little bit to get it started. There you go. So now I can pull this organza and basically unstick it because it was just lightly fused. I didn't crazy put it on, but just lightly, just to tack it. And now I can smooth that down. All right, so that's the goal, is right now making sure everything is lovely and it's making friends and it's just wanting to stay unbubbled, unsqueezed and everything from all the pieces around it. Okay, and down here also, I'm going to make sure that this is nice and flat. Over here, that's flat. Now, up here, you know, I said that's shorter, and that's on the pattern, it's shorter. I don't know why, it just is. It might be a typo. It might be. At this point, I don't know. All right, so I'm moving this corner down here to match this corner, and the side is going to feel really strange, and that is because we have an unmade dart over there. Okay, let me just pin this over here. All right, so what I need to do is they want your final dart to be slightly pointing up so that the top part goes down and the bottom part comes over it. So basically what I'm going to be doing is I just kind of pushing it together so it's flat on both sides here. And they want it so that the bottom is up. Okay, so I have it both here, everything's flat, everything's nice, and I'm just going to push it up. Okay, and pin that in place. And I'm just leaving that for right now. What it says that they want you to put fell stitches along this little crease where this dart is. So I need to get my thread. And the thread that I'm using that matches as close as possible to the outside is the one that I'm using for the inside also. Welcome to the family, new needle. Okay, so let me thread her. And the way that I'm going to be sewing this is, you know, making sure before I get started that everything feels nice and flat, especially these quilting lines. I'm going to need to make sure that those are nice and flat when I'm quilting it. So I actually need this dart to come past that quilting line so that it's going to line up well. So I'm going to put one more little pin right here. Okay, so I got it done. And as soon as I tied my knot, I was like, of course I can't have it attached up here, because I'm sewing this and then I'm flipping the lining over it. So that's no good. So I am going to come back and cut out these cute little felling stitches that I just put in that are attached to the bottom fabric, because I need them to be loose and lining, just of the lining only, not attached to this one. So anyhow, just wanted to share that with you. So what I'm going to do when I'm stitching these is I'm going to stick my little ruler in here like this and go ahead and stitch it so that my stitches won't go through into my bottom fabric, and do it one more time. All right, so my next step is to deal with the quilting, and the pattern wants you to do it from looking at the right side. I'm going to do it from looking at the wrong side. This is my second one. Actually, I already did the first one, and I think that it came out just fine. So if you don't feel comfortable with this, there is absolutely nothing wrong with flipping it over to this side and marking it. And let me see here. if I was going to do that, you know, the edges are still raw, so it's not a big deal to just mark them and go, okay? Fine. If you're going to do it that way, actually, if you're going to do it either way, the best thing is to mark it and pin it nearby. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Before I actually do this, though, I am going to just give a little quick redraw of my lines. I know, one more time. And because I've redrawn them so many times, I'm getting the impression that it's not really that necessary to make sure they're on there at the beginning. And technically, since what I'm doing is placing my pattern and redrawing, if you get to this step and you need to totally redraw, that's fine. Or if you want to wait until this step to draw them on there, you know, you could do that too. Or you could do like she does and thread mark it at the very beginning. Just be aware. So what I'm doing is I have a line here and a line here. I am pinning up the middle of these lines because I want it to be held very securely when I go to stitch it. Okay, and then there's one more line, and I'm kind of curving my fabric as I go because that's the shape of it. There's one more line right here. So I'm going to stick a pin in there. Just going to turn this one this way. Okay, and just so it's easier for me to see while I'm sewing, I'm just going to mark the beginnings and ends of these lines on my right side here because that's easy for me to see. Okay, so first I'm going to make sure I have a decent length of tails coming out the top and place it very carefully at the top, and I'm doing the furthest one towards the middle first. And like I said, I am going to back stitch, but I'm going to grab both of these tails because I don't want a rat nest, and I'm going to hand move it up one stitch, hand move it back a stitch, and hand move it back up a stitch again. And now I should be able just to go forward. Now I'm at the end, and I am going to back it up and back it forward again. Back it forward. Does that even work? Pull it out so I have a decently long tail. So that's what the stitches are looking like right now. I'm going to iron this when I'm done, and all my marks will disappear and it will look much prettier. Okay, so over here at my ironing board, I'm just pulling all these pins out. Gotta get my iron heated up. It has an automatic shut off, which is good because I would leave it on otherwise, but it shuts itself off quite often. So now, I'm just going to press it. All those marks disappear, and I am left with some really nice quilting stitches. I hope you can see those. Alright, so there they are on this side. Now on the right side, they are pretty much invisible. You might be able to see a slight depression in the fabric where they're stitched, but one, it's not that much, and two, that is a distinguishing mark of Chanel and couture sewing. So it's not a bad thing if someone happens to notice, oh, I noticed that you have some quilting on the front of your jacket, and you say, oh yes I do, thank you very much, and just go like that. Okay, so now back over here, I do need to deal with all of these threads, and I'm not just going to clip them, I am going to bury them. I'm using my little needle, my easy threading, push the thread through the top of it needle, because it's easy and quick, and just pushing all of these threads through. I'll just do all of the ones on the lining side first, and then come back and do all of the ones on the fashion fabric side. Okay, so now that I have both the bobbin and the needle threads pulled into that middle layer, I am just doing a big overhead knot, putting something pointy in the middle of it and pulling it down so that the knot goes towards the bottom. But because I did back stitch it on the other side, it's not so critical that that knot stays perfectly at the base here. If it's out a 1/4 inch or so, that's fine. All right, so I'm very excited to be about to put pockets on here. This is the little dot for pocket placement. I'm just going to track that down and put it down here, okay? Because I'm not using their height, but I want to use their width, if that makes any difference. Here are my 2 adorable little pockets that I spent so much time making in the previous video. Okay, they're all lovely and lined and ready to go. So what I'm going to be doing is using this line here as a guide for placement, and I can see what it is because there's such a strong grain in this fabric, but I'm going to go ahead and draw a line because I think that that will make it a little more obvious. I want my pocket to be on the straight of grain here, okay? Now my hem is 5/8. It's just basically a fold down here. And I want my pocket, the bottom of my pocket, and this is an arbitrary design thing. There's not a set deal. I've seen pockets, you know, all over. This is just personal choice. I'm going to want the bottom of my pocket to be about, we're going to say 1/2 inch above the bottom of my edge. So I'm going to put another 1/2 inch above that 5/8. And that's going to give me a corner here to set this pocket. So I'm just going to kind of let that sit there for a second while I draw the same positions over here, and then we'll take a peek and see how that's going to work. So just taking a peek, seeing how I like it, making sure it's actually placed correctly. So if I measure, just to make sure, from the center of this seam to the edge of my pocket is 1.25 inches. And over here, from the center of this seam over, is 1.25 inches. So those are placed exactly the same. And I think that's good. So what I'm going to do is put a couple pins right in the middle, because honestly, that is the thinnest place to pin on this pocket, just to kind of hold it in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is just baste this pocket on, you know, with my white utility thread by hand, and I'm actually going to do the entire thing even up across the top there. I'm going to start down here at the bottom, and just, they're so thick. They are so thick. I am just basically stabbing it straight up and down to try to get it as exactly placed as possible. This is actually the second time I have done this. The first time I did it off camera just to make sure I had everything figured out, and I broke another needle. I broke the eye off. So this is on my 3rd needle, so if that's on the scoring system of difficulty, this is so far as a 3 needle project. But it is put on by a blind hem stitch. And what that does is it gives you an edge that you see no stitching on this side, and you see no stitching on this side. Okay, and it's fairly strong. It's fairly strong. It's not going to hold a huge amount of weight, but look at the size of that pocket. What can you put in there that's going to be really heavy? What we're going to do is use thread that matches your fabric. I have a double strand and it's waxed, and what I'm going to do is get started on this side here. I already have this basted, so it's just going to hold steady. You know, basting is critical for this step. And I am folding my fabric like this. So this is the edge of my pocket peeking out, and I'm just going to hide the knot inside that pocket. So I'm just going to reach basically inside there and take a little stitch out. I've lost my needle. There it is. Okay. So that pocket is kind of hidden in the seam work in there now. All right, so just to get it started, I'm going to take 2 little stitches over here just to give it a reinforced place to begin. All right, so now my stitch came out in that top section, in the pocket section. So I'm going to put it down in the garment section under a couple threads. Because it's folded and my fabric is very thick, I should not be picking up lining fabric at this point. Okay, then I'm going to come up here to the top of my pocket near the edge, not the top of the edge, but the bottom of it, and go under a couple threads, and then come back down here under a couple threads. And pull it fairly tight as I go. Come back on top, pull them, come down below, pick up a couple, and you get the idea. By folding it like this, it's actually pretty easy. And I'm just taking my time and working my way down like that. Okay, so I've gotten to my corner. I'm just gonna set my needle down for a second here and turn everything. Hang on, I got this pin in my way. Okay, fold everything down on the bottom here. I don't know what that is. So it's the same thing. So the pocket is peeking out a little bit, and then I can pick my needle up, and at the corner I'm going to make a couple stitches just to reinforce this corner. Picking that up, picking it up again down here, and then I will get started just working straight across. So again, picking up a couple threads on the pocket part, and then a couple threads on the jacket part. Okay, so using the same technique, work all the way across here, and then up, come back up this side. When you get up here, do a couple extra stitches just to get that corner nice and secure. Do a back stitch to lock it in, and then bury the thread. Okay, so now that I have it stitched, I am going to pull out my basting stitches here. Okay. So now this is what it looks like. I still need to go over and press it, but I've got a secure little pocket, and you look at it this way, you don't see any stitches on the outside holding it on, and on the inside you also don't see stitches holding it on. So I would say that is a mission accomplished. Put all of my things aside, and there we have it. That was our goal for today. Oh, should put my buttonholes on top, is to get to this level where we have our side fronts with our sides. The lining is in, it is quilted, the pockets are on, and everything is good. So we will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.